Welcome to Easily Entertained. My name is Bryson Olson, and here we talk about all the good things, mostly, of entertainment. Today, obviously, I want to talk about Stranger Things. The newest season has come to an end, which means the show has come to an end. There's no more Stranger Things content coming in the future, which is kind of a sad thing for some people and kind of a good thing maybe for others. But you know, my opinions are also kind of in that mixed range, and I kind of want to talk about it because I feel like Stranger Things is one of those shows that really changed the streaming landscape, which I think was very good, and that changed shows overall. But there are some good and bad aspects to what it has done, and as well as what the show is. So let's talk about it.
That didn't come from the troglodytes. No, that came from something else. The Demogorgon!
We're in deep shit.
Kicking us off, the show started off fantastic, okay? And it gave us a very unique premise. You know, it was very different to other shows at the time, and I think that was what kind of made it feel very refreshing. It felt different, which is something that with a TV show, and especially in a world now where, you know, there are shows coming out left and right, you needed something that stood out. And I think this really set the standard for streaming, that they could actually produce shows that were good. Now, about 90% of them now aren't good, but it did show that a streaming service didn't just have to own properties to be really good. It could, to own the streaming rights, but it could produce its own shows that were also really good. And Stranger Things kind of set that standard with its first two seasons in particular. You know, it was kind of dark, which, especially for a show featuring kids, was a little bit different, but also making it kind of fun, you know, taking it through the lens of children and kind of giving them almost that Peanuts perspective where the adults are oblivious to everything, and so all the kids have to do everything, which I think is a very interesting take to do. And because they're younger in the beginning of the series, that allows us to have just a different perspective on it, because it's not like where they're kids but they're like teenagers, so they're at least like semi functioning on their own, but instead it is children. It is the fact that they are specifically innocent, but they are being bombarded by these very heavy-hitting events that are changing their world. You know, people are getting kidnapped. In fact, a friend of theirs gets kidnapped and he goes missing, and they're all looking for him. So that part, I think, was very, very much powerful in getting Stranger Things to really kick off. Another thing is, I think, the references and inspiration that they take from a lot of things. They take inspiration from horror movies, from other pop culture movies, because of the things that were going on at the time. Sometimes they take inspiration from those movies that were coming out in the 80s. You know, you have Alien, you have Star Wars, you have Back to the Future in the later seasons. They are taking inspiration from these things, and even, you know, more in the future that didn't take place during these time periods, but it's like Jurassic Park. Season 2 basically has a whole scene that is like kind of referencing, and it's inspired by the turning the power back on scene in the Jurassic Park. In the first Jurassic Park in particular, and allowing it to kind of take inspiration while still being its own thing, I think helped develop it, especially in the early seasons too. It knew that on streaming services, people were going there for older things. It needed to kind of hit not necessarily older things, but things they've already seen before. And so they still needed to hit that same kind of audience, an audience that wants something that they sort of get, but different at the same time. But if you go entirely new, people are going to be like, what the heck is this? And not get it in the beginning. And I think they did a good job of kind of blending those together. And I think also it showed us that kid actors could actually be decent and not just, you know, reading lines. And I think, one, it's because they're an ensemble, and so as friends they can kind of just interact with each other, and I think that sells it even more. They feel like a tight-knit group of friends, and they grow throughout the series, and that part is really good. And I think what helps in their acting as well, because they are kids, and so there's only so much acting kids really can do because they can't draw upon the same things yet in their life. It's harder for kids to like feel the same level of emotions that like an adult can. And, maybe that's also like the benefit of it is that they are having to grow, and so you're seeing this in a very pure kind of perspective, which I think is cool. But then you also have some of the adult actors that also really hit. Obviously, the main two being Hopper and Joyce. Winona Ryder and David Harbour, they're freaking amazing actors, and absolutely were crushing it, especially in the early season. I mean, they've been crushing it the whole time. What am I saying? They've been crushing it the whole time. Joyce, I feel like, is written weirder later, but in the beginning especially, their characters make a lot of sense. Joyce is a very concerned mom looking for a missing kid. Jim Hopper is a small town cop that's trying to solve this mystery of where this kid went, but he is also having to deal with these very weird things that are happening in Hawkins. And so you kind of have to balance that out. And I really do like how the first bit of the show, like season 1 and season 2 in particular, I think are like perfect seasons together. I think they expand on each other perfectly. They got to experiment. They didn't have to copy themselves over and over. They got to really tweak it and figure out what was going to be fun but interesting and gritty and not empowering, but powerful and emotional. And I think they did a really good job at starting off the series, and I think that's what propelled it to make it to the end here. But just because the momentum was going up doesn't mean it stayed going up.
Is a secret Russian transmission.
Whatever's in this room, they really don't want anybody finding it.
But there's got to be a way in.
As the show went on, after season 2, things started getting a little off. Okay, not bad necessarily, but they started switching up a little bit. Okay, I really liked season 3. Okay, not everyone likes season 3. Season 3 I thought was pretty good. It was close to the first 2, but they gave us a different vibe because it's during the summertime. It tried to lighten the mood a little bit, but kind of as the show progressed, they kind of got to expand their universe more, and sometimes that can be a problem in a show like this or in a movie franchise or things like that. You're expanding the universe, but you need to maintain the connection to what is actually happening. So later that becomes like really odd. Like I think in season 4 and especially season 5, they expand on things, and like some of the things don't really make a lot of sense. In season 3, I felt like we got some pretty good things because they kind of expanded the universe and they took things from the time period. They're having the Russians come in who are also trying to get in on what the scientists at Hawkins were doing with 11 and the psychic children. Okay, and so that kind of allowed them to expand without going too far. Sometimes it's like, oh, we're gonna blow it past, and then they start adding the multiverse or whatever, and then you're like, what the heck is this? I think kind of where they end up falling short later is when they keep expanding the universe in like plot, where you have like, they started off and it's like the Mind Flayer or whatever. You have the Demogorgon as like the main villain in season 1, and then you get to season 2 and it's the Mind Flayer. It's the one who's actually in control of anything, and that stayed the same in season 3, which I think was good. But then after that, you add Vecna, and I don't think Vecna is a terrible villain. However, they should have, in my opinion, have been hinting at him from the start. There should have been little pieces. And my guess is that he wasn't thought of at the very beginning. My guess is that seasons 1 and 2 were probably written together. And it makes sense because they were released only a year after each other. 3, I think, took 2 years. So they were probably writing after they started airing season 1. That would be my guess. And so those 3 all kind of work together. But after that, you introduce Vecna, which kind of complicates things a little bit because then it makes it seem like he was the one in charge this whole time. But the show previously does not show us that. So they're telling more than showing, which I don't think is great. And I think that expands the universe. Sure, if Vecna was there from the start, it would have made sense. And it could have been the Mind Flayer is appearingly the main villain, but then we're getting bits and pieces that there's something bigger at play here, and then we would have gotten that would have made a lot of sense. But that's not the way they did it, and as such it kind of feels a little disjointed because it makes it feel like Vecna is not as powerful as a being as he should feel. He's another one like 11, and 11's already very powerful, almost a perfect replica of Vecna or Henry, and that just means we only get that at the end rather than we need a build up of we need 11 to become powerful because there is a greater threat that exists beyond what they've already been experiencing. But you only get that in seasons 4 and 5, and I think that causes it to lose its momentum on the stakes. But the other bit I like about the progression of the series is that we do get the kids growing up, and they're learning to be the best versions of themselves. They're going through trial and error. You have to learn to go through different things. They have girlfriends or partners or whoever. It's just they learn to become more of themselves. They get more personality because they are getting older. They're not just copying things. They are actually finding things that they themselves are interested in, and that allows them to become people, and in turn that makes them become better friends, and that helps them throughout their adventures. Dustin getting all tech savvy in the later seasons in particular is great because that means he's able to find different kinds of solutions for those kinds of problems. We get to actually see from no answer to an answer throughout the show. It's more of that showing and not just telling, and I think that's great. And what I like later in the series too is that we start to get introduced to more characters, which I think is good. I think it lets us get to know more of Hawkins. It knows more of the side characters, and so you start to care for them more. These people that you don't see all the time that are basically cannon fodder for the show, you actually get to care about a little bit more, so when things do happen, it is more impactful, and I think that side of it got a little bit better as they expanded. You got to know more characters. You actually feel for what is happening in the show. You're not just a spectator. Before you just cared about the kids, but they got plot armor now, so they're making it. There's no stakes. The kids are gonna make it out. Someone else isn't, but you need to care about that person not getting out. Okay, if friggin' Mike's mom or whatever got killed in the first season, we wouldn't have cared. At least in season 4, while there are a lot of debatable things about that season, I did like that some of the stakes did start going up, as they introduce new characters like Eddie, who they quickly make you care about, and then you take him away, and then you have people like Max, who gets sent into a coma because she gets taken over by Vecna and all that. That results in things that start to matter more. It feels like they're not pulling their punches, of which we're going to talk about more with season 5.
You are going to help me.
So now, probably the most controversial, at least, for me, is gonna be that season 5 starts off really good, in my opinion. I think the episodes that released around Thanksgiving were great. I really liked those episodes, and that set a high expectation for season 5. But it did not maintain it, and I'll tell you why. When we got started, they did not seem to be pulling their punches at all, okay? Shit was getting real. The kids are about to be stolen by Vecna. The main group they're getting into their freaking groove, okay? They're a precision team. They're looking for Vecna. They're not necessarily fighting the military, but they're avoiding them and they're outsmarting them. They seem smarter. They seem more powerful than their opponents. They feel really good in this moment, and I really like that. Okay, I know it's not gonna last, but that's okay. Okay, that something's gonna happen that's gonna bring them down, and they're gonna have to build back up again. But that's okay. That is what we want. But we want to see them in their element. And when things start, when shit starts hitting the fan, it's getting real. Okay, so the kids are being kidnapped. No one is safe, seemingly. It looks like Mike's parents are gonna die, and gonna be real, they should have. Things are getting more impactful. Awesome. That's what the rest of the season's gonna be? Yeah, that's what it seems like. Nope. And then it comes back. Okay, we get more episodes at Christmas time. And it gets less impactful. Okay? Things slow down like crazy. It's when you see a lot of plot armor start appearing. And I don't love that. It removes the stakes immediately. The Wheeler parents. You think they're gonna die, okay? They're trying to protect Holly when the Demogorgons are coming for her. And you see brutal slashing of the body. You're like, oh, that Mike's mom's dead. Holy crap. She's dead, 100%. And, I said, they're only small characters, and so they tend to be a bit more cannon fodder. But in that same sequence, at the end of the first section that was released in Thanksgiving, you see Lucas getting attacked. You see Mike getting attacked. You see 11, pinned down. They know if they, do the sonic wave thing, she can't do her thing. You see Will kind of losing it. You see Robin about to die. And, we see them get saved before the end. But you see them get hurt. You're not seeing them, walk off without a scratch. We want the stakes to be high. But as it goes on, they kind of back off. They're like, oh, we're not going to do anything. You start to recognize a pattern where people are getting into these dangerous situations, but they are getting out of them scot-free. There's not a scratch on them. Okay, Steve almost dies in the very end. Jonathan and Nancy almost die. 11 fake dies. Lucas almost dies. Mike almost dies. Everyone almost dies. To actually care about what's happening and actually feel a real sense of fear and urgency for our characters, to really connect us with them. Someone important should have died. To be so for real. Joyce, Jim, Jonathan should have died. Nancy. I didn't want Steve to die because I really liked his arc throughout the entire series, but he could have, and it would have shown us oh, things are getting real now. It's not fake. Okay. And I think what really hinted at that in the first little bit of the season is when Collie returns. I don't like her character. Her character sucks, in my opinion. She doesn't learn anything. Collie was one of those other psychic kids that got experimented on. But she went a different route and was just, so focused on revenge and, hating people who oppress her, which is it's not a bad message, but there is a difference from like getting like what you deserve and, you know, fighting for it rather than just taking revenge out on people and even doing it to people that you don't know. And she tries to get 11 to do the same thing, even though the guy they go after is not like direct cause of her suffering. It was the other guys or whoever. She's just like kind of manipulating, and as a result she also tends to not grow a lot. And that's the same when she returns in this season, and it irritates the crap out of me because they, you know, she returns and Cully and 11 are like, oh my gosh, we're like this, you know, we're like this, we're best friends, we're sisters. And I'm like, bruh, you know, 11 learned that Cully was in the wrong at the end. Like, she wants to help her, that's okay, but Cully does not care. She wants to leave. She is like, oh, let's get the heck out of here, we don't need to be dealing with this. I think her character was really annoying in season 2, but it was like worth it for 11's plot. But she did not need to come back, and that irritated the crap out of me. There were just bits and pieces about the latter half of season 5 that just irritated me. You know, the stakes seemed high, but only at face value. They would show us things and we're like, oh, things are going to get real. And then they wouldn't. And it just kept happening. You know, when you see less fights, and there's nothing wrong with the less fights and stuff. I'm not saying we always need the war fight of between the Upside Down and everything, but we need something that actually makes us care. But they introduce things that don't really matter, or they bring stuff up and then, you know, it goes wrong anyway, and then they have to come up with a new plan. And it's like, then why was this even an option? And then, you know, 11 dies, or fake dies, as we see at the very end. And as a result, all the characters kind of sad at the very end. And they're all going off and doing their own thing, which I think is fine. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But it was not what I was hoping for. And I didn't have all these theories about how the show was going to go. That was not me. I know some people were like that, where they had a lot of fan theories and the show didn't go their way, and so that makes them upset. And I understand that. But if that's the case, it's not not the writer's fault. When season 5 was announced, I was like, ugh, we're getting another freaking, like, I knew there would be another season, and I'm like, holy crap, it took forever to come out. And as a result, it feels weird. Which it did. I think it felt weird, you know, it felt strong, and then it got really lackluster, and it was disappointing. You know, while it would have been devastating to have someone in the main cast die, someone should have. Okay, Vecna should have been way harder to defeat in the last act in the last episode. The last episode, in my opinion, didn't need to be 2 hours. Okay, there was a lot of dead space of just people mourning. I understand, but do we need to have 45 minutes of mourning? Probably not. In my opinion, I don't know. There were things I liked about it and things I didn't. What I think this show has kind of shown is that sometimes too much of a good thing is a bad thing. You know, it started off really good. First 2 seasons, amazing. You know, they struck gold, and they were still pretty good in season 3. That is where I think it should have ended. I think they should have finished that, maybe done a side series or something, you know, focus on Hopper going off and doing his little thing, like have a side bit about like his time in Russia and everything, but have it only focused on him and not really the rest of the cast. Okay, that would have been interesting. And, you know, maybe they would have tweaked season 3 to end it a little bit better. And that I would have understood. But just it then set a precedent that everything needs to be like Stranger Things. It needs to be a hit right out the gate. And that's not always the case. You know, some shows, they find their stride way later than Stranger Things does. As a result, a lot of shows tend to try and do that, and then that means their following seasons tend to be a little bit lackluster, or we have to wait for freaking ever for new seasons. And I'm not saying that's a fault of the creators of Stranger Things. They had the first 2 locked in, and then season 3, you know, was fairly soon after, which I think was good. But the problem with then waiting a long time, part of the problem was COVID, which I totally understand, and that threw a wrench in their plans. But as a result, because there was such a big amount of time between when season 3 came out and when this last season finally released, it caused things to change so much. The world changed, the perceptions on streaming changed, and that kind of caused it to lose its good vibe that really made it interesting. But they do kind of drop off. You start to care a little bit less about what's happening. It doesn't feel as thoughtful as it once did, and that is just kind of sad about it. But that is it for my thoughts on Stranger Things. And I don't think I'm going to rate Stranger Things. Mainly because as a whole, rating will be different than, you know, if I went season by season. Season 5, not my favorite. Probably right mood in that one. Seasons 1 and 2, probably an all day, every day for me. Those ones are freaking amazing. But you have, because it is a show, you kind of have to look at it as a whole. You know, it's not an anthology, it is a linear show, and so you kind of have to see it as the whole picture. And as such, I don't really want to rate it in that sense. You know, if you have a rating for it, you know, let us know in the comments. I want to know. Or if you hated the show, you could tell me that too. If you loved the last season, you think what I'm saying is stupid, you could tell me that too. Okay, I want to know your thoughts, but I hope you at least enjoyed some of my rant. But that is it for this episode of Easily Entertained. If you enjoyed, I really hope you did. Please leave a like and subscribe so that you can be notified of new episodes whenever they come out. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.